Hi, hello, and welcome everyone. Welcome to today's session. And in this session, I am discussing around AWS Global Infrastructure. So, what I'm talking about is the infrastructure that makes up the AWS Cloud platform around the world. We are going to discuss about the building blocks. It's important to understand these building blocks because the services that we are going to use, we are going to provision, they are basically running on these building blocks. Hence, it is important to understand these foundational components of the AWS infrastructure. So let's move forward and let's understand what a region is to start with. So a region is a physical location that are independent from each other and they are geographically apart. You can easily view this from the yellow circles here that currently depict the regions that are currently existing in the AWS ecosystem. So as you can see here, they are spread all across the world. They are geographically very distant apart and for certain larger countries, you have more than one regions within the same country or same geographical zones, but they are still geographically quite apart. Now, the second component that is relevant here is the availability zones. So, availability zones, you can imagine them to be single data center or a group of data center, but within a particular region. So, for example, if we say North California region, as you can see here in this figure, it is comprising of three availability zones. So you can just imagine each of these availability zones to be three data centers, which may be in three different cities in California. So when we are talking about region, there are certain nomenclature that is used in AWS jargon to depict a certain region. So here, like US West 1 is depicting North California. Now the availability zones also that fall under North California is being depicted as US West 1A, 1B, and 1C. And this is a nomenclature that would be followed for other availability zone as well. Now moving forward. There are a lot of regions around the world. As of this recording, there are around 31 regions and 99 availability zone. But I add a plus there because that might well have changed by the time you watch this video. So AWS is constantly expanding, and you don't need to remember all the availability zones and all the regions that are available at any point of time. If you are interested in referring to the existing set of regions, that you can go to the AWS website, go to global infrastructure page, and on this page you will get the current list of regions and availability zones that is provisioned or up and running. So as in this map, you can see the existing regions, and there are some marked in red, which is coming soon, like one in Israel or Auckland, or for that matter, Thailand. Now, if you are interested in further digging down to list out all the regions and the availability zones within each region, you can go and click here to have a complete list for your reference. That is why you need not worry about remembering this info. You can anytime go here and refer to it. Now, as discussed, within each region, we have multiple availability zone. So the AWS regions are connected via a high bandwidth, fully redundant network that is the AWS global network backbone. So these regions are all connected, interconnected, and these networks are highly redundant. So that provides a very high availability and fail-safe from outages. Now, each region will contain two or more availability zones. And what that means is that you can deploy your resources across these availability zone and you get a lot of redundancy by doing that. There is also something called as local zone, which we'll get into a bit in more detail shortly. The local zone basically extends the region closer to your end user, and that is for reducing the latency. When we say latency, it is the delay over the network. So typically, the farther you are from a specific service, the more latency there's going to be across that network. So the objective of local zone is to bring the services closer to the point or the user where we need to deliver those services. Now, let's look inside of a region in bit more detail. So within a region, as I mentioned, there are two or more availability zones. Within those availability zone, you can create your subnets or private subnets or public subnets, and each subnet is always within an availability zone, and you can create as many subnet as you want. The availability zones are one or more data centers. So each availability zone here is composed of one or more data center, and each of those data center will have redundant power source, redundant networking components, and what it does, it gives a good amount of redundancy for power, for cooling, for networking, for all the resources on which the cloud service depends. So it gives a high availability and fault tolerance in case of any kind of outages. So with this redundancy in place, you can peacefully deploy your resources across subnets and availability zones, and you get a lot of high availability for the applications that you run on this kind of infrastructural paradigm. Now, moving on, let's understand what other infrastructure components are available in AWS. So, let's say we have our region here with some availability zone and we have created our subnet. So, now we might want to extend some of the services to our on-premises data center within our company. So, we can use something called AWS Outpost here to do exactly that. So with Outpost, you can run some AWS services on the dedicated hardware within your own premises, develop and build your application and deploy it on your premises. For example, there are certain use cases such as like wherein due to certain governance policies, you cannot deploy a personally identifiable data on the public cloud and you need to keep it within your premises. In these kind of scenarios, this outpost becomes very useful, wherein you can partially run the AWS services, some of the AWS services on your premises, while rest of the non-critical components could be running on your on your AWS. So that is Outpost. Now we also have something called as local zones. So local zones help you to get AWS services closer to your end user, and that means that you get lower latency and less delay over the network because these local zones are closer than the region to wherever your end user actually are. We also have something called wavelength zone. This is also about getting your services closer to the end user, but in this case, via a 5G network, as you can see here. So user can connect with a low latency over the 5G networking to the service that you are running in the wavelength zone, and those are all connected back to the region as well. We would use AWS Outpost to get services running in our on-premises data center, and so that we can use AWS APIs on our on-premises system to interact with the AWS systems that is on the AWS ecosystem. For the wavelength zones, this is about getting single digit millisecond latency to the mobile devices and the end users. It is good for live video streaming or machine learning or augmented reality and virtual reality use cases. And lastly, for local zones, again, it is more or less about the same aspects as that of AWS wavelengths, where we want to achieve single digit millisecond latency to our end users and application. Now, another important part of the AWS global infrastructure is the regional edge caches and edge locations. These are part of the CloudFront network. So, a CloudFront is a content delivery network service, a CDN, and essentially what we use this for are to get the content closer to our end user for better performance and low latency. So, for example, we might cache a video file or images in the edge locations that are closer to our users around the world. And there are many edge locations and regional edge caches. So that means the latency is lower and the user can download or watch those videos without having to go a long distance to fetch the content. They can get it directly from the edge locations that are closer to them. So that is CloudFront network. It's a content delivery network, a CDN. Of course, again, the numbers around number of edge locations and edge caches that is not important, as it can keep changing. With a real world example, let's quickly understand how this works. So basically, suppose you have your company located in Brazil, where you have deployed a media file and you have a user in China that wants to access this file. In a typical scenario, this customer would try to access this file directly from your Brazil servers. But if you have an edge location, then this media file will be cached in at the edge location that is nearer to the user, and next time when the user is trying to access this file, it will be served from the edge location, hence reducing that uh, latency by many factors. So that's how the edge location works. Now, as I discussed, you could go to the AWS website anytime to refer to the current number of regions and list of regions you can refer to which you feel is closer to your end users when you are designing an infrastructure or designing an application. So these reference points are available already. So as of now, 32 local zones, 29 wavelength zones, 31 regions, 99 availability zone, 400 edge locations, and 13 regional edge caches are provisioned, and you can make use of them. And some of them that you see in red are the ones that are coming up. Now, apart from these building blocks, there are various services also, which are the important component of how the AWS ecosystem runs and operates. They are categorized into various domains like storage, database, analytics, networking, machine learning, and so on and so forth. So this is just a subset of the services, but if you go to the website, or you can log into your AWS console, and there you can have a quick dive into the services from this menu, and you can see that there are various categories and there are hundreds of services that are out there. You may not need to use all of them, but there are some important ones which we'll start off with, like EC2 and VPC, and the paradigm around the regions and availability zones could be understood from when we start with these services. So as you can see here, we have VPCs. Inside of VPC, you can see we have different regions that are available to us. So when we launch a particular resource, we can define or when we define VPC, we can define under which region I want to launch. And then we also have the availability zones also. So one thing to understand is that when we are talking about regions, by default, you have one region set for your account. For example, if I am in North Virginia, by default, whatever I will be launching would be going under, no, will be provisioned under North Virginia region. And then I'll get some options to define the availability zones for the resources under that particular region. All of this we will see further in our future sessions. So all of these concepts around the regions and the availability zones we will see in our future sessions where we work with the services, we work with launching certain services under these regions and availability zones. And with that, you will have a much better understanding around the concept of region and availability zones.